How's it going, everyone? Is the theory of evolution science or faith? We live in an age now where evolution is taught in schools and people act like it's irrefutable scientific fact and settled science. But does it have credible scientific evidence supporting it, or is it merely a philosophy supported by faith? Before I begin, first we have to understand what evolution is. Evolution was first coined in 1859 by Charles Darwin when he described it as the process by which organisms change over time as a result of changes in heritable physical and behavioral traits. Changes that allow an organism to better adapt to its environment will help it survive and have more offspring. Now, there are actually 6 types of evolution, ranging from cosmic, chemical, stellar, organic, macro, and microevolution. The only one of those 6 that's truly grounded in science is microevolution, which produces minor variations in animals of the same species. Examples of these variations for microevolution would be all the various dog breeds we have through selective breeding. So variations in animals isn't being disputed by anyone. This is testable, observable, and repeatable, and pretty much been proven true. The problem and dispute with evolution arises when you start addressing macroevolution and the claim that life originated from non-life. First, variations in animals produced through microevolution is not evidence for macroevolution, because all the genetic information is already present in their genes. Nothing new is ever created, and all the animals, such as the various dog breeds, are still the same species. They're all still dogs. Using these variations as evidence for macroevolution is a hasty generalization fallacy, as there's lots of steps being skipped there. So since these variations is not evidence, we can't use it to support macroevolution and must look elsewhere. And to clarify, macroevolution is not saying man evolved from monkeys. That's a misconception. It's saying that all organisms evolved from a common ancestor, but more on that later. First, let's address the origin of life, because you can't have evolution if you have no life. So where did the first life come from? Proteins are made up of left-handed amino acids in a chain, and they must be arranged in a very specific order in order to have a single functioning protein. So the probability of one protein coming into existence through random chance is 1 to the 164th power. That's a 1 with 164 zeros, which is mathematically 0. To quote the scientist James Tour, who is a leading origin of life researcher with over 630 research publications and over 120 patents. He was inducted into the National Academy of Inventors in 2015, listed in the world's most influential scientific minds by Thomas Reuters in 2014, and named Scientist of the Year by R&D Magazine. He has this to say concerning origin of life. We have no idea how the molecules that compose living systems could have been devised such that they would work in concert to fulfill biology's function. Those that say, oh, this is well worked out, they know nothing about chemical synthesis, nothing. From a synthetic chemical perspective, neither I nor any of my colleagues can fathom a prebiotic molecular route to construction of a complex system. We cannot even figure out the prebiotic roots to the basic building blocks of life: carbohydrates, nucleic acid, lipids, and proteins. Chemists are collectively bewildered. Hence, I say that no chemist understands prebiotic synthesis of the requisite building blocks, let alone assembly into a complex system. That's how clueless we are. I have asked all of my colleagues, National Academy members, Nobel Prize winners. I sit with them in offices. Nobody understands this. So if your professors say it's all worked out, if your teachers say it's all worked out, they don't know what they're talking about. In 1953, Stanley Miller conducted his famous Urey-Miller experiment, which tried to replicate what they thought the conditions were like for the early Earth to explain a naturalistic cause for life arriving from non-life, and the experiment ended in failure. producing a low yield for the energy used, and it produced a mixture of left and right-handed amino acids, which is insufficient for protein. Is mutations evidence for macroevolution? National Geographic published an article saying that all organisms evolved from bacteria, and common ancestry is seen in similarities among the different species. Yet the same article also gives the probability of this, which comes out to 1 to the 2,680th power. That's a 1 with 2,680 zeros behind it. So, to show the absurdity of these numbers, I'm going to compare the probability of getting struck by lightning twice, which is 1 in 9 million, to the probability of a single protein coming into existence by chance, to give you an idea of why appealing to chance as an origin simply doesn't work. I'll have the probability of lightning in red and the odds of one protein coming into existence by chance in black. And now I'll add in the probability of all life being descended from a common bacterial ancestor, which I'll put in blue text. These numbers are what the naturalists are appealing to when citing evolution as an origin, an explanation for the diversity of life. I don't know about you, but I don't have enough faith to put my trust in chance and random mutation when the numbers are mathematically zero. The most common argument for common ancestry isn't even the numbers, but seeing similarities among species. But to quote Dr. James Tour, but even with that evidence supporting common descent, all others find common descent insufficient to explain some parts of the data. For example, humans have 20,000 protein coding genes, which is only 1.5% of DNA in the entire human genome. And it is within that 1.5% that common descent studies are primarily focused. A large-scale project instituted in 2003 by the U.S. National Human Genome Research Institute, called the Encyclopedia of DNA Elements, seeks to determine the role of the remaining 98.5% of the genome that was formerly poorly called junk DNA, but better called intergenetic regions. There is ENCODE evidence that part or even much of the intergenic regions have regulatory elements that can affect gene transcription. Also, work on orphan genes casts new light on the uniqueness of some genetic information. Orphan genes are considered unique to a narrow taxon, generally a species, so some interpret ENCODE data and orphan genes as markers for uncommonness. Even further, some argue that biological similarities between modern humans and other hominids, for example, can be considered as common design parameters and need not require a common descent model. The similarity cited among species is, in reality, very small, as more and more orphan genes are being discovered among living organisms. While variations of species are true, new information emerging within the genetic code has never been observed, is untestable and unprovable, and it also runs contrary to the evidence we do have from observable science. DNA, for example, has a remarkable ability to self-correct itself, a process that fundamentally works to prevent mutations, and most mutations that have been observed prove to be harmful. Thus, mutation fails as an explanation for macroevolution. Some supporters of evolution cite Hox genes as evidence for evolution, but that fails too because new information is not being shown, nor are there any instances of new genes, new organs, new proteins, and new species being created. While Hox genes do help organisms properly develop as an embryo, it's an irreducibly complex system that only constructs the organisms from the genetic material already present. The fossil record supports creation. If all you've heard was fossils are evidence of evolution, then this point may come as a surprise. But in reality, the fossil record shows stasis, that things don't change over time, which is exactly what we'd expect from a creationist perspective. While evolutionists like to claim that the fossil record supports evolution, the number of transitional fossils between species discovered is 0. There have been claims that transition fossils were discovered, such as Lucy in 1974, but Lucy was debunked as being an ape. not a new species, and all transition fossils have either been debunked like Lucy or exposed as a hoax. Stasis and creation, on the other hand, is supported by what we really see in the fossil record. An article from Science Daily published April 16, 2018, from the University of Bristol admits that the dinosaurs appeared suddenly and all at once, not gradually over time as evolution would suggest. The lead author, Dr. Massimo Bernardi, curator and research associate at Bristol School of Earth Sciences, said, "We were excited to see that the footprints and skeletons told the same story. We had been studying the footprints in the Dolomites for some time, and it's amazing how clear-cut the change from no dinosaur to all dinosaur was. By examining ancient bugs fossilized in amber and comparing them to modern-day bugs, they're shown to not have changed in all this time." As Grimaldi, curator of the American Museum of Natural History in New York, noted in a Yahoo News article from 2012, when comparing ancient mites preserved in amber to modern-day descendants, he was surprised by how similar they were. In March 20th, 2019, a fossilized bird was found dating back 110 million years on an evolutionary timeline, with a bird egg still preserved. This tells us that birds back then reproduced just like birds today. Nothing has changed. Then we have discoveries such as this living fossil Phis, which was long thought to be extinct and was believed to be a missing link that showed sea creatures evolving to walk on land. But when we discovered this living fossil in 1938, it remained exactly the same as its fossils. Nothing has changed in all these years. The fossil record showing stasis and supporting creation is such a problem for evolution that even the evolutionary biologist Donald Prothero admits that the first major discovery was that stasis was much more prevalent in the fossil record than had been previously supposed. Many paleontologists came forward and pointed out that the geological literature was one vast monument to stasis, with relatively few cases where anyone had observed gradual evolution. So the conclusion on whether evolution is science or faith. Despite there being bold claims by evolutionists and the media that evolution is a settled science, and people such as Richard Dawkins saying, "It is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane." Well, I guess the 500 plus scientists, including biologists, chemists, and physicists, are ignorant when they write, "We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged." And that's ultimately the problem. Evolutionists say things like that because they don't really have much tangible evidence supporting their worldview. While variations in animals are true, and no one is disputing that, evolution has no explanation for the origin of life, no explanation for the complexity of life we see, and the scientific evidence we do see in biochemistry, biology, and the fossil record actually supports creation. Evolution stands only on faith, and people believe it because of indoctrination. You learn it in school, read it in your science books that casually use it as if it were scientific law, and have evolutionists preaching it. But if you never question what they say, and just accept it on blind faith without looking into it yourself, then of course you'll believe it. Evolution is like the story of the emperor's new clothes, where he walks around naked, but is told he is wearing a beautiful robe, and he doesn't question it because he doesn't want to look like a fool for not seeing it. No one tells him they can't see it because he is the king, so everyone walks around with the king prancing around naked. It ultimately is a philosophy standing on faith, created to try and remove God. And that's the real problem. They don't want to believe in God, so they put their faith in myth and try to force science upon it, instead of allowing the evidence to determine the outcome. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a blessed day.